Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs around the internet, including Cover 32, Cold Omaha, Zone Coverage, and numerous podcasts around the internet. He is Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. It's great outside. Holy crap. How are you?
I am fantastic. Considering the last time that we talked, you were shoveling yourself out. And
yeah.
I imagine the version of Our Town that Minneapolis turns into when it snows is all done. So,
right, yeah.
Yeah, so we get to be done with snow for a little while anyway and get to enjoy a little bit of 60-degree weather before it snows again. We have a special guest this particular episode. We are welcoming on Jordan Reid of climbingthepocket.com. He is an NFL draft enthusiast and was recently featured on NFL Network in a very brief scrolling, across the screen thing, but he was featured on NFL Network, damn it. Jordan, how you doing?
Great, man. Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited.
Now, we should mention you're also on Climbing the Pocket, the podcast, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we are going to be going over all sorts of draft stuff. The draft is on Thursday, so we're going to be recording this on Tuesday, hopefully releasing this Tuesday night. So we've got plenty of mailbag to go over. We got plenty of stuff to discuss, including how Cleveland is going to mess this up. But before we get into any of that, just want to thank you guys so much for donating, and thank you for helping us out in the past. We are no one without you guys appreciating us and giving out our podcast to people. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, and you can donate to the show there if you hear value in what we're doing. Otherwise, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, and you can donate to the show there. It's more of a subscription-based, but we are going to be doing something special here for the Patreon people in just a couple of weeks, so you may want to donate there. I got a special surprise for some of you there. So if you enjoy the show, would like to keep it ad-free, would like to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, please go ahead and donate a couple of bucks there. We really would appreciate it and help keep the lights on. So all of the shilling aside, we have plenty of stuff to talk about as far as the draft is concerned. The Vikings are at the very end of the first round, so let's talk Vikings. And actually, before we start the Vikings, the Browns have the two picks in the top four. Guys, how are the Browns going to screw this up?
There's kind of a lot going out there now that they've essentially settled on Sam Darnold. Jordan and I have a mutual friend who's found this to be the case. Also, we saw Benjamin Albright on Twitter tweet out that it's Darnold, and then of course delete it, but Twitter never forgets. So. There's a pretty good chance that the quarterback that they're selecting is Sam Darnold. I don't love him, but I also haven't dug too deep into kind of who he is as a quarterback. Turnovers scare me. People tell me not to worry about turnovers, and told me that about Blake Bortles too. I don't know. What do you think about Darnold?
I'm actually a fan of Darnold. He's my quarterback number 3, so obviously he's not the top guy on my board, but if you think about it, it does make sense why Cleveland would go with Darnold. Obviously, he meets a lot of the thresholds imaginary thresholds that are required of some of these NFL teams. And if you think about the other guys at the top, the 4 consensus guys seem to be Rosen, Darnold, Mayfield, and obviously Josh Allen. Of the two, Darnold and Allen probably meet the most consistent thresholds, and obviously Rosen's off-the-field stuff are scaring a lot of teams away for whatever reason. But the turnovers don't really scare me as much with Darnold because I think a lot of his flaws are correctable, and a lot of his turnovers are attributed to just him keeping 2 hands on the ball in the pocket, and a lot of his other turnovers are just decision-making stuff. So, and I think most of those things are correctable with proper coaching. So his
just decision-making stuff? I feel like that's part of the evaluation of a quarterback. At what point do you go, hey, this guy consistently makes poor decisions. I don't know if I'm going to make him the top guy. I like his tools a lot. Versus, I think that's correctable. What kind of decision-making kind of is correctable. Because I remember this is kind of the exact same stuff with Jameis Winston. When he was throwing a lot of picks, a lot of it was underneath. You couldn't see the linebackers, and some of that has to do with the read progression at Florida State. People thought it was correctable, and he continues to kind of throw picks in the NFL.
Yeah, and that's a great comparison. I think he has a lot of Jameis Winston in him as far as he makes a lot of wild throws, but then he'll come back and be like, man, what the hell was he thinking on that play? Those type of throws. So he is a bit hot and cold, but what I mean by his flaws are correctable is that he tries to keep plays alive a lot. And his offensive line was very poor at USC. So what you see is he tries to keep a lot of plays alive with his legs and runs around a lot and just throws up some bad balls. And that's what you see with him. And I just think if he's able to tame that a little bit, and not to say don't calm him down so much as far as in the pocket trying to keep plays alive, but just don't throw into double and triple coverage from time to time. So that's what I mean by a lot of his flaws are correctable as far as his decision making.
So of the imaginary thresholds that are involved for Cleveland, do any of them involve homeless people giving advice to the owner?
I hope not this time around.
Well, so obviously, there's at least on the field size concerns with Baker Mayfield. Obviously, system concerns too. Off the field stuff, people have kind of cooled down on talking about it, but people still talk about his attitude, his leadership style, cockiness, immaturity. So those are kind of like flags. But sort of on the field, his statistical profile is actually just literally unmatched in the history of college football. And then you go to someone like Josh Rosen, who really from like a mechanical standpoint and from the standpoint of just how you traditionally would scout quarterbacks, really just does a lot of things like pinpoint perfect, really great in terms of accuracy at all three levels of the field, a really great arm, needs kind of more awareness in the pocket, but for the most part stays cool under pressure. And he has off-field concerns in the context of like what's he going to tweet out? Is he going to be too politically active? Is he going to talk too much about the NCAA? Is he going to talk too much about Trump? Is that sort of stuff? And then in addition to that, you've also got questions as whether or not he'll like in a coaching room kind of like resist authority and question a coach too much. And then of course you've got to worry about his injuries. People talk about his concussions and stuff like that. And so from the perspective of comparison, if you compare it to like someone like Sam Darnold is clean. That makes it kind of an easier evaluation. For you, if you're a GM, do those red flags for Rosen and Mayfield, if you have to make the decision and it's kind of riding on you, you'll get hired or fired based on it. Are you still willing to kind of pull the trigger on, say, Rosen and Mayfield? I'm just kind of assuming they're in some order, you're 1 and 2, but
Yeah, I'm huge fans of both of them, especially Josh Rosen. And a lot of his criticism is more off the field than on the field. And like you alluded to, his mechanics, footwork, and pocket presence are very advanced for this point in his career. Now, some things I would like to see him improve on is obviously his speed through progressions. He does stick on his first read a bit too much for my liking, but obviously as he gets more advanced and understands the details of the system that he's in on the pro level, I think that's something that can be correctable over time. But the biggest thing that's hurting him right now, like I said, for whatever reason, is his off-the-field antics that come with him. But me personally, I love the confidence that he exuberates all the time. And I think every single franchise quarterback around the league has some type of confidence and some type of weird personality. That's just always been my belief. And if you think about the top guys in the league, even Aaron Rodgers, he just has a certain type of presence and confidence with his game that comes with him. And that's something that you see with Josh Rosen. And he had an interview today on NFL Network where he was just saying where he's always felt like he was second in his life, even when he came into UCLA, the top quarterback in California.
That's a great clip.
Time.
Yeah,
it was a great clip. At the time was Ricky Town, who was the number one quarterback in the country. And ironically, Sam Darnold was bought in to be like a serviceable backup behind Town, but that's another story for another day. But what Rosen was saying is that he's going to be him regardless. And he just wants to be pushed every single day. He's a guy that always wants to know why. And he just doesn't want to be doing something just to be doing it. He wants to understand why we're doing this. And he wants to know the details of everything that comes with it, because he wants to be able to do it and execute it. Also, he wants to be able to teach it to everyone else around him. And I love that about him, because he just wants to be the best that he can be. And whichever franchise that selects him, I think they're going to get a hell of a player, because he just has that different type of presence and command that you love to see with the franchise quarterback.
All right, well, fair enough. So we're going to end up with probably a quarterback at number 1. I know for a while some people, I think this is a month ago or something, some people are like, well, why don't they just, there's going to be a quarterback at 4. Why don't they just take a quarterback at 4 and have their pick of the non-quarterback at 1? I think we've all kind of moved away from that, because the ability to select a quarterback is definitely superior to the ability of having 3 other teams select a quarterback for you. But what should they do with that 4th pick? I know some people have floated the possibility of just picking another quarterback, which would be super fun, but pretty unlikely. They may pick another quarterback kind of later in the draft. They've got tons of draft capital to do something like that. But, a lot of people are talking about, Bradley Chubb there to put opposite Myles Garrett. They do have a pretty good defensive end opposite Myles Garrett right now in Emmanuel Ogbah, so it might not be sort of the best way to maximize adding talent to the roster. There was a little bit ago talk about adding Saquon Barkley, but now there's so much steam for Barkley to the Giants that it seems unlikely. But then, a lot of people are saying, well, running backs, you can get them later in the draft. They don't help all that much, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on what the Browns should do with that number 4 pick?
I think it's going to come down between either Bradley Chubb or Saquon Barkley. Obviously, the Jets are going to go quarterback. I don't think they would trade up to the 3rd spot for anything other than a quarterback. So one of those 2 guys is going to be left between Barkley and Chubb. Me personally, I would go with Chubb, because pass rushers are a premium position in the NFL today. Obviously, they're one of the highest paid positions in the NFL behind quarterback and I think receiver. I think those are the only 2 positions that are paid higher than defensive ends currently in the NFL. So being able to get prepared Bradley Chubb with Myles Garrett and with Emmanuel Ogbah, I think that would just be fantastic. Now, they have experimented a little bit with sliding Emmanuel Ogbah down inside. Obviously, he can't play there consistently because he won't hold up. He just doesn't weigh enough. But you talk about a really unique and very fast 3rd down package, and being able to mix and match all 3 of those guys on the edge throughout the game, I think you're going to be able to wear down a lot of teams off of the edge. And then, obviously, you have those 2 guys, speaking of Garrett and Chubb, on rookie deals for 3+ years. So I think that would be a great mixture. That's why I would go with Bradley Chubb at 4.
Well, if not Chubb, then so if it's not Barkley, say he's gone. If it's not Chubb for whatever reason, then who? Do you just go to the next edge rusher, Harold Landry, who there are people who say he's a better pass rusher even than Chubb. Maybe not as good against the run, but he's ranked way further down boards than Chubb. You could go with Derwin James or Micah Fitzpatrick or Quentin Nelson. What do you do in the case that, say Bradley Chubb just fails all the interviews with the Browns and they just don't want him?
That's an interesting question. There's a lot of possibilities that they could do. Obviously, the top one probably would be trade back to a quarterback-needy team like Buffalo or somebody like that, Miami, looking to trade up to that 4th spot just to slide back and get a plethora of picks. Hopefully a 1 for next year. That probably would be best-case scenario. But if they had to choose a guy, an interesting situation that was brought about, maybe they could slide Joe Bitonio out to left guard to replace Joe Thomas, and drafting a guy like Quentin Nelson, who's considered a consensus top 10 pick right now. Obviously, he probably won't make it out of the top 8 picks or past Chicago. So that could be a possibility. Another possibility, like you alluded to, could be Harold Landry. Now, he's not as versatile as Bradley Chubb is. He's not as good against the run, but he does bring a much more advanced game as far as a pass rusher. So I think those probably would be the other 3 options at 4.
All right. Well, so that's enough about the Browns. They'll probably find some way to screw this up. I want to talk about just like maybe a couple of other teams before we get to the meat of the stuff and talk about the Vikings at 30. Giants, not a lot of opportunities to select at number 2. In theory, Eli Manning will still be there for a year or 2. In theory, Eli Manning is a good quarterback, and so they won't continue to be selecting around 2. And also, in theory, there just won't be this many quarterbacks to select around this pick range that gives you the opportunity to basically select your second favorite or even favorite quarterback out of 4 potential first round, or even 5, depending on what you think of Lamar. But Saquon Barkley, generational talent, going to be great in the locker room, which is kind of like one thing that people have talked about, that he can change the culture of a locker room. Running backs. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how running backs. I mean, you just mentioned this contract value thing. Running backs get paid less than anyone else except for like tight ends, kickers, punters, and long snappers. So, their value is not great in terms of what they do on their second contract, which is kind of its own thing. Should they get a quarterback here? I mean, again, not a lot of opportunities to select one.
Yeah, I think they have to, especially in a quarterback-heavy draft like this one. And like you alluded to, there's not a lot of opportunities where you have a top 5 selection like they do. And the great thing for them is that it's a great quarterback draft. But what scares me about them is that we just saw a year ago Dave Gettleman took a running back top 10 and a guy that's arguably not even a running back, and Christian McCaffrey at number 8 overall. So he has no problems taking a running back this high. And obviously he's been saying the whole myth of devaluing the running back position is devalued is a myth. So he has no problems with taking a running back number 2 overall. But if they do, I think it would be a huge mistake. And obviously if they take Saquon Barkley at number 2, he would come in and be a guy that is top 5 paid at the position. That's how high the premium is, or the price tag is, if you take a running back this early. I just don't see why they would do that, or why it would be necessary to do that, considering that you have a very early pick in the second round and guys like Sony Michel, or even a guy like Darius Geis, who's been reportedly slipping the past few days down some draft boards from some phantom off the field issues that he has that nobody has proved to this point. But maybe he's available at 34 overall. So I don't think they need to force a pick that early. And we all have seen that you can find running backs at any point in the draft. And that's not to say that any running back in this draft is like Saquon, or in years past is like Saquon. But I just think the production that Saquon is going to have next season, I think you can find that if you select a guy at 34 and also pair him with a guy like Wayne Gallman or even Paul Perkins like they had from a year ago. So I don't see why they would take a running back at 2, and I think they should take a quarterback.
Yeah, all right. I mean, obviously, with the way I framed the question, I mostly agree with you. So it's not going to be a bunch of pushback from me. Well, okay, so let's talk about a couple of other quarterback-needy teams. There was steam that the Cardinals wanted Mahomes, and they were leapfrogged, essentially, by the Chiefs, which great job by them. Kind of excited to see what that does. And then there's tons of steam this year, including just the former head coach saying they should just do it, that they'll get Lamar Jackson. Do you think that's going to happen? I don't know about their new offense all that much. Do you think, from what you know of the offense, do you think it's a good fit? What do you feel about Lamar Jackson as a quarterback? What do you think about the fit? What do you think about just kind of this whole situation with the Cardinals?
I'm a Lamar Jackson fan, actually. And I think he's a guy that's not as traditional as some of the other quarterbacks in this draft class. He has his flaws, just like any other quarterback, in this class, but he brings a different dynamic that other quarterbacks in this class don't bring. And obviously that's with his legs. He's just a different type of dynamic guy when he's able to use or utilize his legs. Now, he's not a run-first type of quarterback. He is a guy that can sit in the pocket and deliver and dissect defenses. He does have his flaws as far as throwing the ball outside of the numbers and deep. That seems to be where he struggles the most. And everyone's talked about repeatedly how narrow his base is and how that affects his inaccuracies to this point. Now, with Mike McCoy, I don't necessarily think it's a great fit. And I'm not sure the quarterbacks that Mike McCoy has had in years past. I think he's been with Phillip Rivers, I believe, for some time before. But obviously, they're two different types of quarterbacks. But I love the fit with him and David Johnson. That's the one thing where I really agree with the Cardinals' fit. And obviously, Bruce Arians' comments earlier about Lamar Jackson saying that he would take him if he was still the head coach of the Cardinals. And I love Bruce Arians coming out and saying that. Now, that don't necessarily mean that Steve Wilks, the new head coach in Arizona, agrees with his assessment. But from a David Johnson factor, pairing him with David Johnson, I think that would be a hell of a 1-2 punch.
All right. I don't know if there's any other super intriguing questions in the first round that don't concern the Vikings, at least from my perspective. But if there's anything you want to get off your chest about, some take that's happening in the first round that you disagree with, maybe you're like, you know what, Colton Miller first round, that just pisses me off. Like, is there anything about a lot of that, which actually that does tick me off. Is there anything about, players that are getting first round steam, which that could be 50 players, honestly, where you just don't see it, where it's just kind of annoying you, or you just want to get something off your chest, or maybe you've heard about what a team is going to do that you just don't agree with?
The Colton Miller one is definitely one because his film just doesn't match up.
It's terrible. Yeah.
It doesn't match up at all. And I've said this repeatedly. He could end up being anything from Jason Spriggs to Nate Solder. We have no idea what's going to happen with that. And he's a guy that's obviously going to be drafted off of potential. And a lot of coaches probably think that they have the secret recipe to help him improve his flaws that he does have in his game right now. But his pass protection is really bad right now. And I just think he's years away from being able to step on the NFL field. And if he steps on the field as a rookie, I just think he's going to be eaten alive. Now, another thought that's really bugging me right now is Mason Rudolph in the first round. I just don't see it. I'm not a Mason Rudolph fan at all. I know Pro Football Focus loves him, and as far as the analytics side of everything, but I just don't see it with his film. And that's not to say that he won't end up being a good player, but his accuracy scares me a lot. And you have to dive a bit deeper with him because his accuracy numbers are really good in that offense, but his ball placement is what really scares me. And he has some really good weapons on the perimeter, and Marcel Aitman and James Washington, who were great college receivers. And they were guys that had outstanding catch radius. And they bailed him out so much on his deep throws and his throws to the sideline. And he has to go to a team that has really good guys on the perimeter. If not, he's going to fail, in my opinion. So the first round steam is kind of bugging me a bit, but he's a guy that maybe could turn out to be decent over the long haul.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't draft him ahead of the third round. So, yeah, fair enough. What gets me, of course, is that at the beginning of the season, a lot of people are like, Luke Falk could end up being the best quarterback in this class. And whenever I think about Mason Rudolph, I think like, oh, rich man's Luke Falk. Some team is going to overdraft Luke Falk too. Probably not in the first. Hopefully not in the first, but that'll be funny.
Let's talk about go in the second.
Oh, Jesus, man. Oh, rough. You just get Logan Woodside at that point. But
he's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I like him. He doesn't have an arm, but I like him.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Vikings then. So there's, of course, every possibility in the world that they trade down. They don't even pick in the first round. Rick wants to get 10 picks. Sometimes you got to trade out of the first to do that. I don't think he necessarily has to. I think he doesn't even have to trade down out of the second to do it. I think you can find 10 picks just by trading down in the third. But it's a discussion. What circumstances would lead you to trade that pick? Are you just going to wait until you see how many offensive linemen or defensive linemen are on the board? Do you think that there's just a good chance that the board is going to play out? Like, what do you think would have to happen for the Vikings to trade down?
It's a tricky question because we don't really know who's going to fall at this point. And I think it has to be a guy that is very high on their board. And that's what Rick Spielman talked about today. Now, he's not locking or tying his hand into one situation. And he came out and said publicly at his press conference today that there's no guarantee that they're going to pick at 30, and there's no guarantee that they're going to take an offensive lineman. So he's keeping all of his options open right now, and he says that they have 5 positions in mind that they want to make at 30 if they do stay in that spot. And obviously their cornerback, offensive line, tight end, and safety, and I'm missing one. I can't think of it right now off the top of my head, but they have 5 positions that they're thinking about right now. So I think if a guy like Isaiah Wynn, I know we both love him, if he falls, even a guy like James Daniels is there, I think they'll probably pick him as well. But I don't rule out cornerback. I think cornerback is definitely a route that they could go. A guy like a Jair Alexander or somebody like that, a Mike Hughes.
There's no way Jair Alexander's falling all the way to – jeez, man, that would make me happy. Okay, so – I see James Daniels. You mentioned him. I see him mocked the Vikings a lot. He's a zone scheme center, moves really well. Had the fastest short shuttle I've seen from a center past 4 or 5 years, and it shows up on the field. The thing that concerns me, of course, is his strength. That concerns everybody about him. It's kind of like the knock on a scouting report, and it's a pretty big one. But like the thing that kind of multiplies my concern is that traditionally people coming out of Iowa are really friggin' strong. I think Brandon Sheriff, Marshall Yanda, and they're not the only ones. There's a ton of really strong offensive linemen that come out of that program. They've got a really great strength program. My concern is also that he's just maxed out, because if Iowa can't make you strong, no one can make you strong. So he will have to play center. The Vikings would then have to put Pat Elflein at guard, and he just had a pretty good year, according to most people, at center. Is that well, I mean, PFF, they got a pretty low grade on him. Yeah. But people are pretty happy. I'll say that. People are happy with what Pat Elflein put together. They draft James Daniels and move Pat Elflein to guard. Is that what you wanted? Because he's undersized too, really.
Yeah, he is, and I don't like inserting him at center and then moving Elflein to guard, because you have two unknowns. Then we don't know how Elflein would translate to guard, and I mean, you can't just slide him over and just determine that he's going to succeed there after playing his entire rookie season at center. So now inserting James Daniels at center and then Elflein at guard, you have two unknowns entering the season, and I don't like that scenario. Now, on your concerns as far as James Daniels being maxed out, I understand your concerns, but I think you have to factor in the age factor. He's only 20 years old, and maybe he is still growing. And maybe he can add some more muscle mass to his body once he gets in the NFL weight training program and starts to eat better and more consistently. So I see him as having – I don't think he's maxed out. I think he has some upside to him because of that age factor, and he's only 20 years old. And I think he's going to continue to get stronger, because that's what you saw in his film as well. He started to get better, and he started to get stronger every single year.
So what would it take for the Vikings to trade up? Because I think this is a possibility that not a ton of people – are taking, I think, seriously enough. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen or anything, but I think, it's Rick Spielman. He's difficult to predict, but also it really feels like if, a player's kind of there, I do think they have enough ammo to trade up and still get 10 picks. I mean, again, you could trade down to the second, trade down to the third. That's exactly what happened with the Vikings a couple of drafts ago. What would have to happen for them to trade up?
It would have to be somebody very high on their board. And obviously we don't know who or how they have their board ranked, but this is an extreme impossibility. If a guy like Quentin Nelson falls to like 20 or something like that, I think they could get an itch to do that. And even a guy like Jair Alexander that we alluded to earlier, if he's sitting there or makes it past the Panthers at 24, maybe he can trade a fifth rounder to move up to 25 with the Titans to go and get him, just because they have their decision to exercise Trey Wayne's option here soon. I think it's May 3rd is the deadline to do that. And I don't think he's a guy that may be in their long-term plans because of so many guys that they have on the pecking order to pay in the next coming year. So they could look to replace him with a guy in this draft. And Jair Alexander definitely could be that guy if he's sitting there at 25.
What makes you so excited about Jair Alexander?
I love everything about him. I love his confidence. I love his swagger. I love his game. I love everything about him. And all the traits that he has, I love to see when I evaluate corner prospects. What you see when he's on the field, he's a guy that has extreme confidence. And I think that's half the battle in order to succeed at the NFL. I think he just has those traits or those intangibles that you love to see exuberated from cornerback prospects. He's a guy, whenever he makes a play, he's going to let the whole stadium know. And he's a guy that has a magnetic personality. And if you go and watch any interview that he's in, he's always smiling and he's energetic in every single one. From an on-the-field standpoint, he has some durability issues. I think he had a knee injury this past year that kept him out of a few games. He only played 6 games last year. But when he was on the field, he's a huge difference maker. And that's when you can tell the signs of an elite type of prospect. If you go back and look at his numbers prior to his injury and then when he was back on the field, Louisville's points per game went down. I think it was like 13 points. They averaged like 36. They gave up 36 when he wasn't on the field. But when he was on the field, they only gave up, I believe, 22 or 23. So obviously he's having a huge effect when he's on the field. And that's the great sign or the sign of an elite type of prospect.
And so magnetic personality, super confident. I don't think he allowed a touchdown this year. Tilts the defense in their favor. Sounds a lot like Mackenzie Alexander, man. What's the difference here? What should I be looking for?
Much more ball production than Mackenzie Alexander had. And I think he's a better athlete than what Mackenzie Alexander was coming out as well. Now, I don't have the numbers here in front of me, but I believe he tested better than what Mackenzie did. And also, Jair provides flexibility or versatility as a punt returner as well and a kick returner. So he brings that type of value as well.
So everyone knows the Vikings need an offensive lineman, probably an interior offensive lineman, could be a tackle. Maybe Connor Williams falls and they play him on the outside, even though there's kind of like some steam about him playing on the inside. Maybe Mike McGlinchey falls, whatever, right? Can they get that offensive lineman in the second round? Because there's a lot of talk about this cluster, right? Ragnow goes top of the second, bottom of the first, James Daniels, Will Hernandez, Isaiah Wynn's going to go even before that. All these offensive linemen that play in the interior could just go in this. After that, even though it's a deep offensive line class, you could end up with not much left. And then at offensive tackle, you're definitely going to end up with not much left. Can they get that offensive lineman in the second round? Do you think one of them is going to escape that cluster and be available to the Vikings around 62?
On the subject of offensive linemen at 62, I think they're going to have to trade up from that position. And interior offensive lineman is the hardest position to project every single year because on mock drafts and throughout the year leading up to the draft, a lot of guys overslot, and big media even overslots interior offensive linemen. And we really didn't see the run on the interior guys really happen until 58 overall last year when Ethan Posick went to the Seahawks. Deion Dawkins went 63rd, Taylor Moton went 64th, and the Elfline obviously went 70th where the Vikings traded up, and Feeney went right after him at 71 to the Chargers. So it's hard to predict exactly where it will happen. Now, I think this crop is much better than the crop from last year. And you talk about guys like Frank Ragnow, who's starting to get some steam, Austin Corbett, who's reportedly much higher on a lot of guys' draft boards, and many people are predicting him to go in that early second round. So my perfect scenario, I'm really hoping the team trades up to 30 to target a guy like Mason Rudolph at that spot, and the Vikings are able to trade back maybe to the Giants at 34 if they decide to go Saquon Barkley at number 2. And maybe the Vikings can get that 34th pick and get a guy that's sliding down their board. It's very high on their board, but sliding at that 34th spot. And if they want to target an interior offensive lineman, use that extra ammo that they got from trading back to slide up or trade up from 62 to go up and grab their guy.
All right. Well, let's talk about a couple of those pick 30 scenarios where they might grab an offensive lineman. Let's figure out sort of which player you want out of the two. So the Vikings have a choice. It's between Billy Price and Taven Bryan. Who are you taking and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would take Taven Bryan because right now I don't like the risk associated with Billy Price as far as him coming back from the pec injury.
You really think that's like that doesn't bother me at all? Really?
The whole Brandon Fusco things. I know I don't like. You're not supposed to compare the two, but I just have nightmares of that happening all over again. We just haven't had good luck with pec injuries, and the limited amount of rehab time with Billy Price scares me a bit. And
I think had like 8 pec injuries, and one of them turned out to be like a long-term problem. Come on.
That's true, but I mean, Price would be a great pick, but I would rather go Taven Bryan because of the risk associated with Price.
All right, Taven Bryan or James Daniels?
I would go with James Daniels, but I would experiment with him at guard because I have him ranked higher on my board than Taven Bryan, but defensive tackle is definitely a need, but I just think Daniels has more upside than what Taven Bryan has at defensive tackle.
Even though defensive tackle is probably a thinner class, you think?
Yeah, because I like being able to get a guy like a Nathan Shepard at 62 if he's there. I like the second tier of the interior defensive line class, and who knows, maybe if a guy like Maurice Hurst might fall down because of his heart condition, depending on his medicals as well.
Well, let's talk about it. Maurice Hurst or Taven Bryan?
Oh, that's tough. I love Maurice Hurst, man. He's a top 15 guy for me in this draft. I just wish I could have or see his medicals just to see how bad the heart condition is. But I think it's a no-brainer if he's fully healthy and gets cleared by the Vikings training staff.
You think in a world where he falls to 30, that sounds like a lot of teams didn't clear him. So you don't have access to the medicals, but you have access to the knowledge that 29 teams said no to him. Now, obviously, 8 of those teams, they just had better players to pick or whatever, right? But, there's at least 15 teams just said no when they could have had him. Knowing that you don't have access to the medicals, knowing that he's available at 30, you got to pick between him and Taven Bryan. Or you're just going to be like, hey, I don't have access to the medicals. I have no idea what my team said. But he played at Michigan. He says he's cleared. Obviously, trust the player who knows their body better. Why would he have a reason to lie?
Obviously, you go with Taven Bryan in that situation. And then Mike Mayock had him barely in his top 50, in his top 100 prospects today. So I think the heart conditions are probably very concerning with him.
Okay, well, let's assume that your team clears Maurice Hurst. Say his heart's fine. He just falls because players fall. Let's say that happens. You're picking between Maurice Hurst and Isaiah Wynn. Who do you pick? Fantastic scenario, right? Dream scenario.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? What happens,
I go with Isaiah Wynn. He's a top 10 player for me in this draft. I love Isaiah Wynn. Yeah, I love Isaiah Wynn. I'm
influenced you that much, man. Wow.
I'm a huge fan of Isaiah Wynn. I just love his film. He went out in the SEC and dominated at left tackle, despite him being much smaller than a lot of thresholds or requirements of NFL teams. He still was able to go out and dominate with a torn labrum, which he has gotten fixed. I think he had surgery the first week of February, and he's expected to be ready for training camp. But that injury is very common in offensive and defensive linemen. There's a lot of guys running around with a torn labrum. Some guys don't even know that they do have a torn labrum, so that injury is very common. But I think him even going down to the Senior Bowl and fighting through that injury and still putting on a clinic down there was just phenomenal. And everything that he did down there matched up with his film. So I'm a huge Isaiah Wynn fan. I would plug him in at right guard, and I think he would be just fine there.
All right. I like this. This game is pretty fun. Will Hernandez or James Daniels?
See, we need to have this debate as far as Will Hernandez not being a scheme fit. We're in agreement. And I think we need to tell the people why he's not a scheme fit for the Vikings.
I mean, you got the mic. Tell him.
So Will Hernandez is at his best when he's in a man-blocking scheme, when he can block vertical or going vertical and putting his body man-to-man on others. Now, what really surprised me at the Combine was how well he tested as far as lateral agility and the other things that he did at the Combine. He tested very high or very good in those situations. And this is a debate that we had, obviously, as far as him being a better fit in a man scheme. But seeing how he tested, I don't know, man. He might be able to fit in a zone scheme. And I'm starting to warm up to him a little bit, especially after the Combine when he did test so well. But when you turn on his film, he doesn't move as well as he showed at the Combine. But I love his film as far as what he showed and him just being an absolute bully. And I've made this comparison on every podcast that I've been on. If I was a celebrity and I could choose one prospect out of this draft class to be my bodyguard, Will Hernandez would be that guy. He just absolutely crushes people every time that he's on the field. And I just love everything about him.
So you take Will Hernandez then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Long story short.
All right. Well, so let's talk about what could happen sort of in the middle of the draft. So the Vikings could potentially take an edge player in the 3rd round. A lot of people want them to take a tight end somewhere. Pretty thin class would be kind of difficult too, but maybe they find a gem. A lot of people, let's say they don't get that cornerback early. Maybe they could get like Duke Dawson or MJ Stewart later. Who knows? There's a linebacker. You always get kind of this late round linebacker. This is an insanely athletic linebacker class. Maybe they get the kid from Yale, Oluokun, I think. You could get Matthew Thomas from Florida State if his, red flag's clear. They want a running back that has the ability to catch the ball. Maybe someone like Nyheim Hines. Who in the middle rounds do you think feels like a Vikings pick that you're excited about?
Well, you just named him, Nyheim Hines. He's a guy that they have showed a lot of interest in, and he's your typical change of pace back. Now, he's not as big or as physical as Jerick McKinnon was, but I think he brings a bigger explosion factor than Jerick McKinnon brought to the table, and obviously he brings some value as a return specialist as well, where he was very successful at NC State. But he's a guy who can flex out in the slot or on the perimeter at receiver. And you can use him as that third down back behind Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray. That gives you a more versatile factor than they bring to the table. So Nyheim Hines would definitely be that guy.
All right, and then is there anybody else sort of in the draft that you've kind of got your eye on that you don't think will go in the first couple of days? Doesn't even have to be a good fit for the Vikings. Just somebody that you think, hey, they're not going to go in the first 100 picks, but really, I feel like they should be in the second round conversation or something.
That's a great question. This guy hasn't really got a lot of steam, and he tested very poorly. But Rashawn Golden from Tennessee, he's played a lot of different positions for them. He's played nickel, and he's also played outside corner and safety. So he has a lot of versatility. I think he measured at about 6'1", right under 200 pounds. So he has those measurables that Mike Zimmer loves to see in his corners. But I think he's a guy that's going to have to play the slot because he only ran, I believe, a 4.6 at the combine. So he doesn't have that. Yeah, he doesn't have that straight line speed that you love to see in corners. But on his film, he plays much, much faster than a 4.6, and he brings that versatility at safety as well. So if he doesn't work out at nickel, I think he's a guy that can transition to safety and be just fine. And he brings tremendous value on special teams as well.
Man, it's not even just that. I just looked it up. A 30-inch vertical, that's the lowest I've seen for a corner.
Yeah, he tested very poorly.
Wow, man, what happened? He throw up that day? Jesus. All right, well, what are your thoughts about sort of the Vikings' probably overall approach to this draft? Do you think that they'll get 10 again, or do you think we should probably just let that number go?
I think they will get to 10, and why do I say that? Is that Rick Spielman understands that the top end of his roster is going to start being very hefty as far as in the salary department. So the back end of his roster and his backups are going to have to be low budget or low salary guys that are very efficient. And you talk about being able to pay like Eric Kendricks, who they just paid, Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, and Danielle Hunter, and Anthony Barr. So those guys are going to be close to the top paid at their position. So the back end of their roster is going to have to be very, very plentiful, and he's going to have a lot of depth because he's not going to be able to make those free agent signings for depth. So now he has to hit on some of these day 3 guys. So I think he's going to trade back, and he's going to be able to recoup the 4th rounder that he lost in the Sam Bradford trade. And I think that's where he's going to start seeing Trader Rick really take over like he did last year, where he traded back, I think, 7 times in between day 2 and day 3. So I think that's where he's going to start trading back. Yeah, definitely. I hate when he does that, but I understand why he does it.
No, yeah. Well, okay. Well, actually, I was going to say this is the end. Let's go to the mailbag, but actually, let's do another one of these games. These games are fun. I don't usually do them. Let's take a day 3 guy and try to match them up. But they don't have to be stylistic comparisons, and obviously they're not talent comparisons because they're day 3 guys. Just guys that would replace them on the roster that you could see if things go the right way, they could start. So who in day 3 could say, if they don't agree to contract terms, the Danielle Hunter, who in day 3 do you think in a couple of years could take that job?
I want to say a defensive end, but I don't really like any day 3. Oh, I got one. So his name is Ade Aruna from Tulane.
He wasn't a great tester.
Yeah, I think his testing was kind of weird because I think his vertical and his 40 were okay, but everything else really wasn't that good. But his athletic profile is actually pretty good, and his production is actually pretty good as well. And I think that's a guy that they could end up taking a chance on in the later rounds. And he's that typical mold that they love as well. A guy, I think he was like 6'5" or something like that, 260 pounds. So he has that same similar build as Danielle Hunter. Obviously, he's not as chiseled as Danielle Hunter, but he has a very similar body frame.
You're right. His athletic profile is super weird. Jump through the roof, 38.5, jump pretty far, 10.8 broad jump, but then just these awful agility scores, 4.48 short shuttle and 7.53. Might be the second slowest in the class. 3-cone. Okay, that's interesting. All right, let's go to linebacker. He's replacing Eric Kendricks, day 3.
Well, this is tough for me. And a guy that they've been heavily linked to, his name is Jack Sitchy from Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that they really like, but he does have a lot of injury concerns with him. And I think if he does go undrafted, I think he's a guy that they will be heavily on. Now, he's more of a wheel as opposed to a Mike, but I think he's a guy that can transition inside to being a Mike as well. He started for the 15 games when he did have his breakout season in 2015, I believe it was. But after that point, his body just started to completely break down. He tore his ACL, in practice in 2016, I believe it was, when he was just starting to hit his stride. And ever since that point, his body just hasn't been the same since that point. And that's why I think he really probably will end up going undrafted, just because of the injuries that do come with him.
All right. And then Stephon Diggs, super easy to replace. So who you got?
Yeah, right. I'm going to go with a guy named Richie James from Middle Tennessee State. Stats were off the charts.
I just put his data into my database. That's interesting.
I'm a huge Richie James fan. I'm not sure exactly how he tested at the combine. I didn't really track him as much. But as far as his film, I think he's phenomenal. A guy that's probably going to be only a slot guy, because he's not a guy that consistently can hold up on the outside or win on the outside, just because he doesn't possess enough length. But if you put him in the slot, I think he's a guy that's ready-made from day one. And he was hurt this past season, so he really fell off the map. He battled a shoulder injury, but prior to this season, his stats were phenomenal. And he was one of the biggest impact players in the entire country as far as being able to carry his offense. And I think he's going to be a late-round steal for somebody.
You really like your injured guys, your small school guys. Even Sishi's just a walk-on, right? Like, yeah, I don't know if I'd even count him as a big school guy. Do you like any guys that, people like or no?
I'm a big underdog story guy, man. I love the underdog story.
And people who are healthy are just not on his radar. Doesn't believe in it. Angers up the blood.
And I'm sure there's plenty. Those are guys that's just off the top of my head.
Fair enough. We'll keep an eye on them. James, you got some mailbag questions we can go at?
Yeah, let's start off on the mailbag. Luke Braun, who asks, which top 20 prospects do you foresee falling to 30, and would the Vikings take them? Or what about top 40 prospects falling to pick 62?
A top 20 guy I definitely could see falling would be Isaiah Wynn, the guy we talked about earlier. I could see the labrum issues probably scaring some teams and him not being ready right away. Or even a guy like Billy Price, who definitely I expect to go on day 2 at this point because of the torn pec. And we all know that's a serious injury, especially for an offensive lineman. So just keeping it with the Vikings base need, I think those would definitely be 2 guys that could fall in that range.
Yeah, that pack really had. You're like, Jack Sishi disintegrated, but I'd like the Vikings to grab him. But Billy Price, no, torn pack.
You guys are killing me. It's all good.
James, what's next?
Next up, Kyle Slaby asks, after the flop of Rodney Adams, what do you think about the Vikings pick up a day 3 player with return potential? Possibly Pringle or James or Kuti. If drafted day 2, would Hines fill that role as well?
Yeah, those are 2 great alternatives. And Rodney Adams, that guy, he was out of the league so quick. A lot of people had high hopes for him, but that's a different story for another day. But I love the 2 answers that he did give. And Kiki Kute from Texas Tech, I think he definitely could be a possibility. He's a guy that was a very explosive option at Texas Tech, and he's a guy that wins mostly in the slot, so he basically would be limited to the slot, but he's a guy that's a very successful returner as well. So you're getting 2 birds with 1 stone there, and obviously we touched on Nyheim Hines earlier, and he brings a whole bunch of versatility and value as a third running back and return specialist as well.
All right, Alec, if you're not going to provide a pronunciation guide, this is just going to be awful, but Alec Depkrinsky asks, Giants call and offer you their 2nd and 4th, so pick 34 and 108, to move up to 30. Which realistic, not Nelson or Wynn, prospect makes you turn down the deal because you're not risking passing on them?
Oh, it definitely would be Jair Alexander. That may be my guy. If he slips to 30, I think it'd be a monumental steal by the Vikings. I mean, pairing him with Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, and then including him in that secondary with Harrison Smith and Andrew Sendejo, I think that would be a fantastic secondary.
Bill Botke asks, using Arif's consensus big board and a FanSpeak draft simulator, it is difficult to get a top-tier offensive lineman pick at 62 for the Vikings. If we miss out, are there any late-round sleepers that could help us this year?
Yeah, I think there's one guy that definitely could help, and his name is Mason Cole from Michigan. He's a guy that's played center and left tackle when he was there. And he really played out of position when he was at tackle. He's definitely not a tackle. He's a guy that definitely needs to kick on the inside. Now, one thing that's really weird about Mason Cole and why I think he'll end up being a guard is that his snaps are all over the place.
They're awful. Oh, my God. Yeah. I was going to wait to jump in and say that. But, yeah, his snaps are terrible.
And you notice that on film, and I think this was brought up at the Senior Bowl as well on the telecast, why his snaps were just all over the place. So I think he's a guy that's going to translate better to guard, but he does have some versatility at tackle. Now, I don't think he'll be able to hold up out there except in emergency situations if you just need a guy that can play it for a handful of games. But I think he's a guy that definitely could contribute at guard.
At the Senior Bowl, this is before, the telecast, we were watching one-on-one drills. And so, he'd snap the ball so that the defensive end and the left tackle could, respond and begin their drill or whatever. And so they had an offensive lineman catch the ball, and he kept on snapping it to his left. And so the lineman is Scott Quessenberry. Did probably, I would imagine, one of the bigger insults you could do to a center from another center. He just moved over to the left and just stood over the left guard. It was incredible.
And the snap went right to him after he did that?
Right. It was perfect.
Wow. Wow.
So,
that's hilarious.
So that's where we're at with Mason Cole snapping.
Ouch. Next question we have is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, assuming we don't draft offensive line, what could you see them doing? Could they seek to find a cheaper replacement for one of the expiring rookies? If so, which is most likely to be selected to be replaced?
Oh, this is tough. I think it's going to be either edge rusher or receiver because those guys will probably be the highest out of the bunch. And I'm talking about Stephon Diggs and Danielle Hunter. Those guys will be the highest or the hardest to extend because of their price tag. But a guy that I'm a big fan of, and it's not the consensus idea or belief amongst the evaluators, but I'm a big fan of Rasheem Green from USC, and I've been very open about this. Now, he's a guy whose production has gotten better every single year, and he has the traits to match up with it, but he's extremely raw. And a lot of people were surprised he came out this year, but those same people were saying if he would have stayed one more season in college, he probably would have been a top 15 pick, definitely a first rounder. So he's a guy you probably won't see his true potential probably until about 2020 or 2020 because he's so raw. And he reminds you a lot of Danielle Hunter. Now, he's not as twitchy or he didn't test as well as Danielle Hunter, but he's a guy that has that lots or is full of upside, but you won't see it until a couple years down the road.
So he weighed in at 275 during the combine. There's some talk about him playing on the inside, playing on the outside. A lot of film of him at USC is playing on the inside.
Yeah, he was out of position.
Yeah, so you think he should lose some weight and play on it? Not a ton, obviously, and lose a little bit of weight to play on the outside?
Yeah, he's definitely an edge rusher, and I think they put him in there because they had some injuries, but what you see is he's just getting destroyed by double teams in the run game. But he's definitely a guy that's definitely an edge rusher, but he can kick inside on third down or passing situations.
All right, next question we have is also from Kenneth Allen, who asks, I don't know your Twitter handle, J. Reid Draft Scout. I don't know his food opinions, so let's just get his quick take on turkey, since Arif has been famous for calling it a garbage or trash bird, I believe. Trash food.
It's a trash meat. I have no opinions on it as a bird.
It's so... I think turkey is very overrated.
Oh, fantastic. All right.
It's so dry. It's the driest piece of meat that you can have. outside of Thanksgiving, I never eat turkey.
We're such good friends, man. I really appreciate it.
I don't know if you know this,
so
but that is actually Arif's like qualifier as to whether or not you're welcome back.
Yeah.
I've had to lie about my turkey take for 231 episodes. Maybe I've just been getting better stuff. I don't know, but
maybe you just can't tell trash meat from good meat. It's okay.
No, it's very possible. Next question is from Nick Olson, who asks, rate your favorite and least favorite cuisines by their ceilings and floors. Example, pizza has a high floor because even when it's bad, it's good. But it also has a low ceiling because really good pizza isn't nearly as good as really good sushi.
I think that's actually a pretty good take with regards to pizza and also sushi, which has a really low floor. So that's interesting. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that like fits the pizza sushi paradigm nearly as well as just the two of those just so perfectly encapsulate like those qualities. That's interesting. Well, I guess it's pretty easy for. No, that's not fair either. I don't know. What do you think?
I hate sushi personally. I'm not a big sushi guy at all. The whole raw meat thing, I just can't. I know you can cook sushi, and some people like it cooked, but most people eat it raw, and I'm just not with the whole raw foods thing. So I'm not a big sushi guy. But as far as high ceiling, I'm a big tacos or burritos guy. I love tacos, whether it's shrimp tacos, beef tacos, chicken tacos, it doesn't matter. I am a taco lover.
I'll say this about tacos. I think people think it has a relatively low ceiling and a high floor, kind of like pizza. I don't think that's the case. I think it has a really, really high ceiling. I think you can get just some really phenomenally good tacos. Here in the Twin Cities, you go to El Taqueriendo. You can get my favorite tacos they have are these beef tongue tacos, which I know sound like I'm choosing them to choose like a weird sounding food. But no, they're genuinely the best tasting tacos there. They've got my girlfriend really likes the tripe tacos, which also sound like we're picking a food that sounds disgusting just to pick a food.
You chose the pork belly because it had the high fat content, not because you just wanted to tell people you had pork belly tacos.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which, by the way, pork belly tacos
totally delicious. I 100% agree.
But yeah, they've got chicharron tacos that are amazing. So I think you can, and I think some really nice fish or shrimp tacos can have a really high ceiling. I think tacos are secretly a high ceiling food, and I think a lot of people treat them like a low ceiling food.
Yeah, I love tacos.
Well, that is going to be it for the mailbag and for the episode. Jordan, do you have anything to plug before we let you go?
Yeah, so you can check out my work at climbingthepocket.com. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at JReidDraftScout. That's JREID Draft Scout. I also just released my 2018 NFL Draft Guide. You can go get that. That's pinned at the top of my Twitter page. You can also find it at climbingthepocket.com. There's a lot of things included within that. Over 175 scouting reports, scheme fits, player comparisons, and also you can get it for $5, and all the proceeds go to the Raleigh Rise Against Hunger organization here in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where I reside.
All right.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. That was awesome.
Thank you for having me.
And that's also going to be it for this episode. Arif, do you have anything to plug for us before the draft?
I want people to head over to zonecoverage.com and check out the draft guide that we've got there. It's part of the premium package we're putting together so that they can pay people like me to continue to work there for like $2.99 a month. You get the premium package there that gets you access not only to our draft guide, which has the consensus board stuff that everyone seems to love. It has a bunch of videos that Luke and I put together about a lot of the players in the draft, a bunch of articles that Sam has written about the Vikings draft needs and draft strategies, a bunch of really cool stuff. And then that membership also gives you access to premium content I'll be writing all year that'll be behind the paywall, as well as the training camp guide that people love. So instead of paying $20 at once, you can get access to it just by signing up for the premium membership, which is cheaper month to month. And you get access to a bunch of other content too. So head over to zonecoverage.com, see that, get access to the consensus board, some of the premium stuff I've been doing with the consensus board, including an analytics board that I put together that gives players with good analytical profiles small boosts in the ranking versus the consensus, as well as players with poor analytical profiles, a bit of a ding. And that's the board I might be working off of. I don't know by the time the draft starts. So be sure to check that out.
Where are you going to be watching the draft this year?
I don't know, I'll be at Vikings HQ all 3 days, so be able to get like the interviews from the draft prospects as they're selected, and the pressers from Spielman and Zimmer and stuff. So that should be a lot of fun. Luke will be there, I'll be there, Sam will be there, the Daily Norseman crew should be there. Hopefully, I don't know if Eric will be there. I think he double scheduled something, but the rest of the Daily Norseman crew should be there.
He's not going to show up in 65-degree weather in that sweater.
Yeah, the blinking lights. Yeah,
I want to see a picture of him in 65-degree weather there in Egan, just ready to go. If he doesn't, I'm going to have to question his, whole dedication to this Vikings thing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. And who knows what's in his heart? He has to put it on his sleeve, man.
That's awful. Well, that is going to be it for this episode. We wanted to give you just a little bit of an appetizer before we actually hit the draft on Thursday. So we will be back early next week to talk about what the Vikings did and make fun of the Cleveland Browns, likely. So that is, it's a yearly tradition. So that is going to be it for Arif. For Jordan, I am James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and continue to demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pogachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono, or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, NorseCodePodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.